Are you ready?
Yeah.
A
What?
gem
What?
mint
Wait.
10. I was shocked.
Wait, you're joking. I did not think this would get a 10.
In our first PSA card submission, we had an insane PSA 10 hit rate of 82%. After sharing those insane results, a lot of you have asked me to make a video explaining how I selected the cards that gave me such a high return. I just want to start off and say that I am not an expert. I'm just a hobbyist collector who's a little picky when sending out the cards. And a lot of this is complete luck. Sometimes you get an easy grader who just got laid for the first time, and sometimes you get the guy who just saw his best friend get laid for the first time with the love of his life. It's a flip of the coin. We can't control PSA's mood or sex life. What we can do is give ourselves the best possible shot by sending the cards that have a legitimate chance at a 10. So before we pick out our best cards for grading, let us read PSA's criteria on their website. PSA lets us know in this short paragraph, for a PSA 10, we need 4 perfectly sharp corners, sharp focus, and full original gloss. We need free of staining of any kind, but an allowance may be made for a slight printing imperfection. And we also need 55-45% centering on the front and 75-25 centering on the back. Let's start with talking about centering. These days we got both physical and online tools to help check how centered our cards are. Online examples are websites like edgegrading.com and centeringcheck.com. Now, if you're able to perfectly center your card and accurately match the app's borders to the card's borders, then these apps will be helpful. However, I dislike them as they frustrate me when I try to line them up perfectly, as there's too much user error, aka me being bad. The physical one in theory are easier to use, however I've never used it, so I can't really speak about how good they are. Personally, I just do the eye test. If it physically looks off and not within the 55-45 criteria, I typically won't grade it unless I really like that card. If it's borderline where I'm questioning it a lot, I might send it in and gamble depending on the card and if the value of a 10 is worth gambling for. On to PSA's other points. The 4 sharp corners and full original gloss basically just mean they don't want to see any nicks or whitening in the cards or scratches or print lines in the holo. The best way to spot imperfections in the holo foil is with natural light. Tilting the card at different angles really helps reveal any surface flaws. Room lighting works too, as long as you use the same technique, but for me, natural light is best. However, we should not ignore this point that they make, where there is an allowance for a slight printing imperfection that doesn't affect the overall appeal of the card. PSA is pretty vague about this, but my interpretation of this is that if there is a slight whitening from factory flaws on 1 or 2 edges that aren't very obvious, then it's okay and it still can get a 10. If you look through eBay and the back of many new 10s, you're often going to see slight whitening on 1 or 2 corners. This is the nice thing about PSA, there's some leniency, but again, it depends on the grader. Now let's go through my selection for our next submission. The first card we're going to take a look at is Liz Clefairy EX Black Star Promo. This card won't be included in our submission, but it serves as a great example of what to look for before deciding whether or not to submit a card. This card is very well centered and matches the criteria of 55-45 on the front. On the back, however, it has noticeable whitening on the bottom left corner that can bring it down to a PSA 9. Now, small whitening that is not very noticeable can pass as a 10, but these whitening spots are noticeable and we don't even have to squint our eyes to see it. So if we can notice it very easily, the grader can as well. Now, the actual first card in our submission is the Toxtricity EX Black Star Promo. Now, taking a look at the front here, we can see that the card is well centered both top to bottom and left to right. This card is a non-holo, so we don't have to worry about any imperfections in the holo foil. On the back, again, the centering is great, and this card is flawless with no whitening on any of the corners. Now, this card was going for crazy numbers back in May, but during editing I noticed it dropped all the way to $20, which is basically grading fee. So this card may be removed from the submission, as a PSA 10 at this point of time would just cost me more than add value to my collection. So it's always important to look up the value of the card in a PSA 10 right before you send it out due to the volatile market, and see if it's still worth sending out, because grading ain't cheap. The next card in this submission is the Fire Chicken Blaziken. This card centering is slightly heavy on the left, but it still looks to be acceptable and within the 55-45 criteria based on my naked eye. On the back, the centering looks good and the card has no flaw on the corners or edges. Here's hoping for a 10 on this beautiful chicken. And I always put every card in a new penny sleeve before I put it in a card saver. Chicken shawarma. The next card up is the Greninja EX Black Star Promo from Shrouded Fable. These promos are notorious for being difficult to grade due to the centering and whitening issues, but I got lucky with this one and this card is super minty. As you can see, the card is very well centered on the front, and the back has no whitening or wear on the corners and edges. I'm very hopeful of a 10 in this, and the 10s are going for just under $300 these days. The next card up is the Drayton SAR from Terrestrial Festival. Japanese quality control is generally much better than English, so you'll often find a lot more of your pulls are PSA 10 candidates in Japanese sets. This card, as you can see, is very well centered, and it also has no flaws on the back either. However, I ended up removing this card from the submission, just like the Toxtricity EX, as recent sales are only around $20, which is basically the cost of grading. I'd only still slab these cards if I'm in love with the card, but I don't have a strong attachment to this one. Sorry, Drayton. The next card is the Pikachu Black Star promo from the Paldea Adventure chest. This card is well centered again, fitting the PSA 10 criteria. On the back, it is almost flawless, but does have a tiny spot of whitening on the upper right. Now this whitening is not very noticeable, and it is what I would consider a factory flaw. Per PSA, slight printing imperfections are allowed, so this is still a good 10 candidate. The next card is the Entei V Alt Art from Crown Zenith. We already got a PSA 10 on the Suicune Alt Art from Crown Zenith in our first submission, so this time I'm trying to complete the PSA 10 trio with Entei and Raikou. This Entei has near perfect centering on both the front and back, and there's no whitening or other flaws on the back either. From my experience with the Sword and Shield era, I didn't run into a lot of whitening issues with quality control, but I did have a lot of terrible centering. But with the Scarlet and Violet era, almost every pack fresh card had some whitening on the back. The next card is the Mewtwo Secret Rare from Glory of Team Rocket. As you can see, it has the typical Japanese quality control we've come to expect, with near perfect centering on the front, and no flaws on the back either. When I filmed this, I was still debating whether or not to send it in, since some Japanese secret rares don't really hold much value, but this one holds decent value as a PSA 10, so it will be going in the submission. Next up is the Shining Magikarp from Celebrations. This is actually a card gifted to me by a friend who left the hobby. As you can see, it has perfect centering on the front, and no flaws in the holofoil. The back looks clean too, with no whitening or flaw. My goal is to hopefully get a 10 on this and gift it back to my friend, and hopefully he accepts it. Next up is N Zoroark EX Full Art from Journey Together. This is another minty card with near perfect centering, and the back is flawless with no issues at all. While this card doesn't have much upside, as a PSA 10 only goes for around $45, it still serves as a good example of the type of cards we're looking to submit. That said, this might not make my final submission. Next card is the Skarmory IR from Surging Sparks. This card is again well centered overall on the front. It is a little left side heavy if you look at the upper third of the card, but definitely falls within the 55-45 range. The back has a tiny hard to see whitening spot on the top left that I would regard as a slight printing imperfection or factory flaw, which still makes this a strong 10 candidate. Next card is the Eevee 2025 Pokemon Day promo from Prismatic Evolutions. The centering on this card is a little right side heavy, but not by much, and most likely falls within the 55-45 range. Now looking at the back, it is almost flawless, but does have a tiny speck of whitening on the upper right corner. Because of the small size, I will continue to assume it will be considered as a factory defect, and hopefully a 10 on this one as well. Now this next card is a big one, the Greninja SAR from Twilight Masquerade. This is the first card in the submission that I actually predict a PSA 9 for due to the back whitening. But the front centering is the reason I am sending this card in, as it has near perfect centering. This is a card I actually don't mind in a 9 because this will always stay in my personal collection, so I kinda just want it slabbed, but I'm obviously hoping for a 10. Now the back has whitening in 3 separate corners, one on the upper back left here, a big one on the lower back right, and a very hard to see one on the lower back left, although maybe I just imagined it. So most likely this will get a 9, but I am hoping that the centering carries it and my graders just chill like that. Next card is another Crown Zenith Entei Alt Art. This one is pretty similar to the previous one, very well centered on the front and flawless on the back. 2 chances for an Entei to get a 10, but I'm hopeful for both. The next card is the third legendary dog, Raikou Alt Art from Crown Zenith. On the front, this card is slightly top heavy, but it looks to be within the 55-45 criteria. And on the back, there are no imperfections to be found again, so hopefully we can complete the 10s for my dog trio. Not Doug trio. Next card is the Umbreon VMAX from Brilliant Stars. This card has great centering from right to left, but the top border of this card is very difficult to see. I tried to guesstimate where it is, but honestly, I'm just going to gamble with the top here since the rest of the card is minty. The back looks great with no flaws, so here's hoping for a 10. The next card here is the Umbreon V Altart from Evolving Skies. This card is very well centered left to right, but it is a little heavy on top compared to the bottom. It's definitely borderline 55-45, so I wouldn't be surprised if this one ends up with a 9. The back is flawless once again, which just goes to show that Sword and Shield era cards typically had pretty solid quality on the back. Unlike you, damn Scarlet Violet. The next card is the Eevee Illustration Rare from Twilight Masquerade. This one's another strong 10 contender, very good centering all around, and no imperfections on the front and back. I'm very hopeful for a 10 for this one. The next card is the Noctowl promo card from the Stellar Crown Pokemon Center ETB. This card has well within 55-45 centering on the front, but does have small whitening spots on both top and bottom right corners on the back. But we will hopefully assume these as factory flaws. However, since it's in two corners, I wouldn't be surprised with a PSA 9. These PSA stamp promo cards are very valuable in 10s because they are very rare to get in mint condition. But it's definitely worth the risk as this card is pretty clean overall. The next card we got is the Milotic SAR from Surging Sparks. This card's a beauty. Pretty much perfect centering on the front here, and for once, no whitening on any of the back corners or edges. This is one of the cards I'm most confident in a 10. The next two cards we're submitting are the Magneton promos for the Surging Sparks Pokemon Center ETB. We got lucky with both pairs being strong PSA 10 contenders. Let's take a look at the first promo here. Centering is definitely within 55-45 criteria on the front. On the back it is clean except for the small whitening on the upper back right, which we will assume is just a factory flaw. Pretty happy with this one. The second promo is a little right side and top heavy here, but I still believe it just falls within the 55-45 for both. Not as well centered as the first one, but still very good. On the back it also has small whitening on the upper right corner just like the first promo, which again we will assume is a factory flaw. The centering on the back is also greatly off here, but luckily for us, the back is a 75-25 acceptable range, so we're good. They are both strong PSA 10 contenders, and I'm curious to see if they both 10 or if the second copy gets a 9. The next card is the Hydrapple SIR from Stellar Crown. This card I actually predict a 9 due to some flaws on the back. On the front, the card is slightly left heavy but within the PSA 10 range. However, on the top edge there is a minor nick that is very hard to see. You can see it better on the back right here. The card also has that very common minor whitening we've been seeing with the Scarlet Violet cards on the top right corner, which again we will assume as an acceptable factory flaw. However, that nick may be enough to bring this down to a 9. The next card is the Pheasantipity SIR from Shrouded Fable. This card is noticeably right heavy on the front, and just by the eye test it is borderline 55-45, so it could be a PSA 9 due to this. The back is very clean though with no flaws, so it really does come down to the grader's point of view. This one could go either way, a PSA 10 or a 9, so it's not a definite PSA 10, but for me, it's worth the risk. The next card is Team Rocket's Moltres SAR from Destined Rivals. This was kind of a last minute addition to the grading pile just because I really love this card and decided I want it slabbed, kind of like the Greninja. However, similar to the Pheasantipity SAR, this one, as you can see, is clearly off-centered. This time it's noticeably left heavy, and honestly the centering might be a bit worse than the Pheasantipities. I expect a PSA 9 for this card, but with that being said, the back is very clean with no flaws, so I figured I'd go ahead and send it in and see if it can land a 10, as there's always a chance. I do have a PSA yearly membership which allows me to pay only $18.99 per card for grading. It used to be cheaper, but unfortunately PSA recently increased the price, of course. And the yearly membership itself is $149, and I used to think that it wasn't worth it and too expensive. However, over the past year, PSA has given out 3 different One Piece promos through the magazine partnerships, and those promos alone are worth over $200 collectively. So if you were to sell them, you've already made back the cost of the subscription and more. So it definitely helps soften the blow. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching and reaching the end of this video. Let me know what cards you think will get a PSA 10 or if you found any flaws that I have missed. I ended up removing the Pheasantipity and the Hydrapple from the selection because the more I looked at it, the more I realized they're most likely PSA 9s. And I didn't really know if I wanted 9s in these. So we will be making a video when these cards return from PSA to see what grades they get, so please tune in for that. And if you are watching this way into the future, the video will be in the description below. So please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and have a great day. Bye!